Welcome to the updated Dr. Bernstein podcast. Please check the description for the original sources, and all content is general in nature and should not be considered medical advice. Today we're diving into, well, it's kind of a long-standing debate in the diabetes world about protein. How much protein is okay if you have diabetes, and how does it affect our kidneys? We've got some research from PubMed to pick apart, and of course, a lecture from the man himself, Dr. Bernstein, sharing his experiences and thoughts.
Yeah, Dr. Bernstein, he definitely has some strong opinions about this, doesn't he? Informed, of course, by his years of practice and, his own journey with diabetes. And he really pushes back against that common advice, the one we hear all the time about restricting protein, especially for folks worried about their kidneys.
Yeah, he doesn't hold back, that's for sure. He points to this rat study from way back in the 1980s as like the starting point for what he sees is this misunderstanding about protein. Even going as far as to say, I think, the findings were later retracted.
Right, that study. It pops up all the time in these discussions about protein and diabetes. Basically, they took these rats, put them in groups, right? Fed one a high protein diet, the other group just got their regular rat chow. And surprise, surprise, both groups ended up with signs of kidney problems, diabetic nephropathy. But the high protein group, their issues were worse.
Okay, so far so bad for protein, right. But, and this is Dr. Bernstein's whole point, both groups of rats had sky-high blood sugar, completely uncontrolled. And his argument is you can't really tell if it was the protein itself that was the problem or just the out-of-control diabetes. And given what we know about how crucial blood sugar control is for managing diabetes, I can see where he's coming from. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, with the way that study was designed, it's impossible to separate the protein from everything else going on. It's like trying to figure out if a cake is too sweet just because of the frosting when you also dumped a whole bag of sugar in the batter.
Exactly. Too many variables. So it's messy, right? And then Dr. Bernstein mentions a retraction. Although trying to track that down is, well, let's just say it's proving difficult.
Yeah.
But putting the retraction aside for a second, it feels like he's onto something here.
Definitely. Even if we can't find a formal retraction, this whole discussion just highlights how important blood sugar management is for anyone with diabetes. Maybe, just maybe, like Dr. Bernstein suggests, if your blood sugar is in a good place, some of those potential downsides of eating more protein wouldn't be as bad. We need more research, for sure, and on humans, not just our furry little friends.
Makes you think, right? It's not just about protein in isolation. It's about how it all works together, this big metabolic jigsaw puzzle that is diabetes.
Precisely.
So let's shift gears a little bit. We've got those rat studies, but what about us humans? You've got some research from PubMed. And it sounds like it might paint a different picture, especially when it comes to restricting protein for folks with type 2. One study even suggested there could be some harm in cutting back too much, which, wow, if you've been told to avoid protein, that's got to be a bit of a shock.
Yeah, one that really jumped out was from 2018. It's a big systematic review. It looked at tons of randomized controlled trials, published in Lipids in Health and Disease. And what they found, get this, was that cutting back on protein for folks with diabetic nephropathy, that's kidney disease from diabetes, by the way, it didn't really move the needle on kidney function.
So no easy fix there. No magic protein lever to pull.
Nope. If anything, it might even make things worse.
Oh, worse how?
They saw a possible link between lower protein and higher proteinuria, especially for the type 2 folks, and that's a sign your kidneys aren't happy, right? They're spilling protein.
Okay, so this is basically the opposite of what a lot of people have been told for years, huh? Don't eat protein if your kidneys are a concern. But this is saying, well, maybe that's not the whole story.
Exactly. And again, it kind of backs up Dr. Bernstein's whole thing, right? Challenging these old assumptions, even though he was looking at rats initially. So, okay, we're getting the picture. Less protein isn't automatically better, but then how much should someone with diabetes be eating? Is there like this perfect number out there?
The Goldilocks zone of protein.
I wish. Unfortunately, it's not that simple. This is one of those areas where the research is, complicated, still developing, really, especially when you factor in kidney health on top of diabetes.
Right. So, no easy answers. But I'm guessing this 2015 paper you sent, the meta-analysis from PLOS-1, I'm guessing that has some clues for us.
It does. It suggests that limiting protein might be helpful in slowing down kidney disease in some cases, like folks with type 1 diabetes. And actually, they even saw that benefit in people without diabetes.
Hold on. So restricting protein help people who don't even have diabetes. That's interesting. But not so much for the type 2 group.
Not so much, no. Which tells us, again, that everyone's different. What works for you might not work for me. And it all goes back to something we were talking about earlier, that idea of personalized care. Dr. Bernstein's a big proponent of that, as we've seen, even if some people think he's a bit out there.
Yeah, no cookie-cutter solutions. Everyone's got their own unique situation. So bottom line, it seems like we can't just say protein is good or protein is bad, can we? It's all about figuring out what works for you.
100%. And that's where, having a good doctor or registered dietitian, someone on your team who really gets it, that's crucial. They can look at everything, your history, your blood sugar, what your life's like, and help you figure out the best way to go.
It's bigger than just one thing, right? It all connects.
Exactly. And this is going to sound familiar, but it goes back to what we were saying before about blood sugar control. It's like the foundation, and it probably plays a big role in how your body deals with protein in the first place.
Right, right. It always comes back to that. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. If our listeners are going to walk away from this, what's the one thing, the most important thing for them to remember about protein and diabetes?
That's a tough one. I guess two things, really. One, Dr. Bernstein's got some really interesting things to say, makes you think, but at the end of the day, you got to talk to your own doctor,
Yeah.
right? Figure out what's right for you.
Yeah, because what works for one person, even if it's a doctor with diabetes, might not work for someone else.
Exactly. And the second thing, don't be afraid to ask questions. Stay curious, do your research, and don't just assume something's true because you heard it somewhere, even if it's medical advice, especially as new research comes out.
Knowledge is power. Right. Take control of your health. Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive. Lots to think about when it comes to protein and diabetes. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and thank you for listening.